Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Essential Skills for Life Science Entrepreneurship Roundtable, hosted in partnership with Fauna Bio. I'm Jen Blinkle, Director of New Product Development at APS, and I'm happy to join you today to help facilitate this conversation. Now it is my pleasure to bring in the panelists. Today we'll hear from Ashley Zehnder, CEO and co-founder of Fauna Bio, and her colleague, Katie Grabek, Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Fauna Bio. They are joined by Celine Halioua, founder and CEO of Loyal. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to jump into this conversation.
Hello, thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Hi.
All right. So to get us started today, I'd like to ask our first question, which is, what has been important for you in building your company? Ashley, you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. I think so. I think important skills for starting a company are, first off, I think recognizing, what are the things that you don't know, right? Because there's going to be kind of a lot of them. So I think having some humility about starting something new and recognizing that there's probably going to be skill sets that you need that you don't have. And so being willing to ask questions, particularly of those people who are maybe one or two stages ahead of you. I think we've been really fortunate being where we are in the Bay Area. To be able to work with founders of companies who are, say, a round or two ahead of us. I think those conversations have been super important in terms of kind of learning next steps and where to go for resources. And we've gotten a lot of good tips, even from hiring and partnering and, scaling a company from those CEOs who, like I said, are really just maybe a stage or two ahead of us. I think having good co-founders is super important. I know we sort of talked about this in the last webinar, but I think we've been really fortunate to have people founding this particular company who are very complementary in their skill sets. And I know that there are lots of people who are very successful sole founders. Celine is one of those. I don't think I'm brave enough to do it by myself. So I'm really glad that I have good colleagues to do that with. So I think those things are really important.
All right, thank you. Katie, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think important one thing would be to really think strategically about the outcomes you want to achieve and where you want to be. So we have to think about where we want to be several years down the road and then work backwards from there. And then really prioritize company-wide what's important, what should be focused on each day, because you have to realize that there's too many things to do and decide, what's a distraction, what's not critical. Because if you try to do everything at once, you just end up not making very much progress on anything. Another thing that's been important to me for just building a company is just always reminding myself, and I try to remind our teammates too, that this is a marathon and not a sprint. So if I'm burned out, this is going to pass down to the rest of the company and feedback to everyone else. So eating healthy, sleeping, exercising, taking breaks are needed. We're trying to solve very complex problems. And I feel like if I'm not at my best, then I can't do my best and contribute to my best. And then just other things, realizing that you have to grow into different roles, like Ashley said. And sometimes those roles are not pleasant. So I always try to find ways to keep a few things that I love doing to myself and the company as well.
Great, thank you. Taking care of yourself, that's a nice thing to hear in the list. Celine, is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think so for context, I came from a PhD program. I didn't complete it, and then I came to SF, worked in venture for a couple of years, and then started Loyal. And I think the biggest difference, to be fair, I went to a very conservative institution, so maybe it's different with experience that you guys have had, but at least for me personally, there was a lot of kind of untraining that I had to have in terms of like the mental mindset that you get when you're a PhD student or a postdoc. For example, at least at my institution, hierarchy was super important. Like your importance was really determined by how many letters you had behind your name, how many years you were there, how many nature papers you had. I once got in trouble for talking to somebody who was 2 levels above me instead of starting with the person 1 level above me and getting them to talk to the person 2 levels above me. It was kind of BS, and I think that was like really important to unlearn. Like actually, like in general, people have no idea what they're doing. Just because somebody's older and has, more wrinkles or gray hair or looks like a CEO, they often are figuring out things from like the ground up, just like you are, and they're just kind of like acting in confidence. And so I think it's really important to kind of almost build like a dissociation with like hierarchy and then back at yourself that like, yeah, you can figure it out. You are smart. You can think through the problem and you can tackle basically anything in front of you. Again, it can be different. Like this, I can't go and like first principles my way into discovering a new like pathway, right? Like it's not around scientific principles, but around things like people management, you know, building a company, fundraising, storytelling, leadership, hiring. You can actually learn a lot of things on your own. So I think that's first. And then the second one is just being like radically, I always hesitate to say this because I feel like the only people who say they're self-aware are people who are not self-aware, but whatever, being like radically self-aware. And so really like, I usually have like two talk tracks in my head is the thing I'm saying, and then I'm assessing the thing I'm saying, and then I'm assessing the impact the thing I'm saying is having on the people in front of me. It's really important for learning how to, you just have to grow so fast. If you're a founder, you have to figure out what your mistakes are. You have to be super okay. I was telling them earlier, we've been having some like issues this week, and it was like a really big accelerated week of learning for me where I realized like my management style, while like really good for like when we were 20 to 40, isn't working now that we're 60 plus and have a bunch of execs, even though it like on paper like seemed really great and positive and like had these unintended consequences that I had to be aware of, despite the fact that it was something that I was actually pretty bought into. So just kind of building that like radical accountability and radical like attachment to the endpoint, and not attach like building a successful company and not attachment to who you are now, because the minute you get attached to who you are now, which gets a lot easier as you get further along and become more successful, and people are like, I want to take a picture for a magazine or whatever. The minute you become stagnant, like you're kind of screwed.
I love the way what you all said blended together there. It is about like being aware of yourself, taking care of yourself, being aware of your problems and the challenges that come up, and that growing on the job. So there's a lot of opportunity once you get started. What do you wish you would have known, or what do you think is really helpful that you really do need to know when you're jumping in on this? What do you wish you would have known when you got started?
I'll start. So when I first started the company, I think I was just purely focused on the science. I thought, you know, if we just had the science accurate and we had these amazing results, everything else would fall into place. And that, yeah, like Celine said, there's a lot of academic habits that you just have to end up breaking. So really, I wish I knew how to tell a great story from the beginning and communicate that story to a broader audience. People, yeah, like we talked about in our last webinar, investors don't really care about the bar graph or the broader audience. They want to know what you're doing. What problem are you solving? Not just, this is my amazing data that I have. And we had so many investors early on just tell us, oh, this just sounds like a science project. It's way too complicated. You know, I'll never understand it. So we really had to get that storytelling down. And then I realized, and another, you know, mind switch too, is that I think in academia, you tend to have a lot of time, but very little money because you're surviving on grants. So you get money, you just try to save every penny you have. And in startup life, it's the opposite. We tend to have a lot more money, but very little time. And so realizing that you can't do everything yourself, it's not efficient, you need to hire, and tap that brilliance of your team members that you've hired and let them shine. So like Celine said, being self-aware, and just, I wish, you know, early on, you got to kick your ego out the door and not think highly of yourself. You end up putting yourself last as the leader.
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow a little bit from what you guys said earlier, which sorry to do that, but it actually, I think for me is the thing I wish I had learned the most, which is I burned out. So I was like, imagine like a lot of you, you know, 18 on, I like worked in 2 labs at the same time. I took extra like credits every single term just because I wanted to learn more. I had a double major. At the summers, I worked in lab full time on top of taking courses. Then I went, you know, to Oxford, and I was like working at the same time of being at Oxford. I remember I like submitted a paper on like New Year's Eve, and that was all great. And actually like all that like hustling, quote unquote, was very like helpful for getting to being able to build like a track record of competence so that people would have the willingness to make bets on me. And that's kind of how I eventually got my opportunity in SF. But I didn't really transition in my head the difference between, okay, previously I was hustling very explicitly to kind of get out of like the situation I was in, to I am now in the situation I want to be in, and I now need to you know, complete that marathon. So the combination of like not switching that mindset, I used to do 9 p.m. copies every single night. This was also during COVID, so I think that didn't really help. I was like going absolutely bonkers inside of a house all day, every day. I burned out so bad, and I didn't even realize it until I took my first vacation actually, about 2 months ago now. And I'm a totally different person. Like, I hadn't read for like a year and a half because I just like, couldn't stand reading. I wouldn't listen to podcasts. I used to listen to like 5 or 4 audiobooks a month. Hadn't done that in like 2 years. And I just thought that was like, oh, normal. And it wasn't. I was just burned the hell out and just couldn't stand any more stimulation. And 3 weeks of vacation, a like relatively boring vacation, like I just went to Austin and San Diego, really reset my mind. And I now really, really regret not doing that sooner, because I think I was bringing 50% of the quality to a lot of things that I was doing.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
hear that. You have to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
No, I think I agree with both what, Kate and Celine said. I think it's easy to think that you don't have the time to take those breaks. And I'm much more guilty of that. Katie, you're much better at it than I am. But it's true that you need that mental break to be able to do that. I think, part of what I feel like has been helpful in starting a company like this is really getting a breadth of experience prior to starting Fauna. So I think, I was fortunate enough to come from more of a clinical background. So I did, my academic training in veterinary medicine, but then I was a clinician, in a very high powered emergency practice in New York City. So I did overnights and learned how to troubleshoot and solve problems really rapidly in the middle of the night. It's one of these things, like do something or some animal's going to die. You have to make a decision, right? But I think that sort of will help you later in life, because you don't always have time to think through everything you want to do. But then going through and doing clinical research and then doing basic science research and then, coming back into Fauna gives me an appreciation of how all those things piece together in parts of what we're doing. There was this interesting realization we had when we started Fauna that of the 3 of us, somehow I was really the one that had actually cultured cells on a bench before. Like Katie and Linda had not done a lot of cell culture. And so we were starting a lab and trying to validate some of our early hits. And I would run in the lab and I would split cells and I would run out of the lab and go pitch investors. And it was this weird, like, stage of life where I was trying to do stuff on the bench and also, interfacing with folks. But it was nice to be able to finally walk away from that. But what's nice is that I understand what it takes to optimize experiments on the bench and understand how much work that takes. And so I think having gone through all those experiences makes me appreciate how hard all of those jobs are. And then it makes you able to hopefully better manage projects and timelines and, what it takes to optimize things in the lab and appreciate all of that. So.
Yeah, that's a really important thing. Like, I don't consider myself a scientist, but I've spent like a lot of hours in the lab, and that's been very helpful for exactly that, having a mental model so that I could help my R&D team. I can like ask the right questions, and really the skill set that you have to build is knowing, okay, how are you facilitating versus like, I'm not tempted to go try to be the lead scientist at Loyal because I know I am not, right? But that's often something I've seen with a lot of academic founders, is that they don't want to hire a CSO or VP of R&D, even if they're like their number one priority isn't leading the science, and our priority is like facilitating the company. And so kind of divorcing yourself and seeing yourself as like a PI instead of a like postdoc is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way you talked about the balance here and knowing, being aware of the science, but also knowing to tap the brilliance of your team. And so building on that, when you're looking for a team, members or partners, what are you looking for? Like, what do you think makes a good addition to your team or a partner for you to work with?
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I think if we're hiring for a specific set of skills, obviously we want to know you just have the required skill set. Having grants, publications, patents, those are important, but they're not really the most important criteria, I'd say. But we do like to ask, in what way is this person excellent? Are they passionate about something? Are they humble? If they spend the whole time talking about all the awards they've won, they don't really acknowledge anyone else that's helped them along the way, that can be a red flag about personality. If you've completed a PhD, then it's really like, can you explain your dissertation well? We're not looking for the continuation of the project, but just that deep understanding and that you can work independently and bring something new. And then we also like to think of like, what will they bring to the table that is different for our company? Do they fill any blind spots? So it's funny that Ashley, Linda, and I have all taken personality tests now since we've started Fauna. And, if you can imagine the personality, they always show you as a square or a triangle. We're all at different points. So we all complement each other really well. I like to go focus really deeply, where Ashley's very good at multitasking and doing a lot of things at once. And I think that's really helped us grow as a company. And so
Linda balances right in the middle.
And Linda balances right in the middle. She can focus deeply on the science and also pitch at the same time, where I'm like, no, you have to do either or. And so we like to think about that when we bring in new hires too. Is their personality different? We don't want a bunch of clones of ourselves. We want different experiences and different perspectives and different backgrounds. And that really just fills out how we are as a company and fills in our blind spots to make progress.
Yeah. I like bringing in people who, we do get a lot of people coming out of academia, and try to figure out what that motivation is. A lot of times it's just wanting to make a bigger impact, and not wanting their major impact to be grants and papers, while those are important. But they really want to see that work that they're doing be translated into something that impacts in the real world. And so to do that, then it's being able to mind switch from, the most important thing I can do is make sure that I'm first author on this paper, to making sure that we make a drug that helps millions of people, right? And however that has to happen, whoever needs to work together to make that happen, that's what we need to do. So really finding people who, like Katie mentioned, are not just, I need to make sure that I am the star of whatever this is, but like that the whole project succeeds. So we have a pretty strong no asshole policy. We talk about hiring at Fauna, like it's just not worth it. We just all have to work together. And I think, what you mentioned about the three of us kind of having this very complementary set of skills and personalities, what we've heard from early employees is that has then sort of trickled down into this kind of culture of collaboration across teams at Fauna, that they see the three of us modeling that kind of open and friendly and humble collaboration, and then that kind of everybody else kind of follows that model. And so it's interesting to watch how the founder dynamics really do trickle down into the company.
Yeah, and I think it helps say, like, it's okay to be different. It's
Totally.
okay to have a different perspective.
It's actually good.
They'll see us disagree and like, wait, I really need more time to think about this. And so,
yeah, exactly.
Like, no, we need an answer right away. And so when we both agree, we're like, oh, this is really important.
But it's good to be able to balance and take advantage of different people's skill sets, right? I really appreciate the fact that Katie can go and really think deep about a problem and take the time to come up with the best solution. And then I oftentimes am like task switching constantly. And so that's not the best way to get to a deeply scientific answer on anything. So you need both of those.
Celine, is there anything you'd add to that?
So we hire a lot of different types of people, and so it really differs from, role to role. But when we're hiring scientists, we actually don't care about degree or lack thereof. Actually, one of our best scientists, I recently learned, only has a master's, and then did his PhD by working at Pfizer. And he's an absolute superstar and has been, going up the ranks at Loyal. I would hire 10 of him. So I really look for people, again, it really depends, with our scientists that are, focusing, we'll bring in people who are, metabolic fitness experts. I want somebody who knows that field inside and out, obsessed with it, and wants to stay in it for the rest of their career, or at least a foreseeable future. That's a very different kind of, that type of role is, good if you're passionate. It's almost like having a research role in that area. The negative is there isn't going to be tons of career growth in that necessarily. You're not going to become a manager. You might be able to grow up in an IC, independent contributor to a role, but that kind of role, if your primary value to the company is being a technical expert on X, we're not going to take you off of being a technical expert to make you a manager. So that's really something to balance when you're thinking about, it maybe should or shouldn't be this way, but in general, if you're chasing, being early at a startup, getting big equity packages and, moving up the salary chain, it generally kind of the easier way to do that is being willing and able to go into management. And so when we hire scientists at our management track, I really look for people who have a very strong, competent background in whatever their thing is, whatever their field is, even if it's totally irrelevant. We actually don't hire people in general with aging backgrounds because I find they're super dogmatic, and all about their one pathway they think is the panacea of aging. But whatever their background is, what I look for is like, how well do they understand it? How well do they understand what their work did? How well can they explain it, which is usually a proxy for how well they understand it, how much do they achieve in that? Because usually somebody who's like a very good scientist in like a somewhat related field will be able to apply that thinking structure, those frameworks to whatever you throw them at, and they actually will be better at it, I find, often because they come at the field totally unbiased, right? Versus if you're like, I don't know, we don't do telomere stuff, but say you're like a telomere biologist, you will be kind of biased by your opinions, by the lab you're in, and by the ideas that you worked on, the stuff that you published in. So I really look for people who are just very competent in whatever their thing is as a predictor of their general ability to learn. And I think the last thing I look for is I look for people who are resilient. I don't expect our scientists to have a lot of like startup context. Often they haven't had that context, but the number one pain for a startup founder is going to be somebody who needs a lot of, startups are like, right? And if you're freaking out every time something goes wrong or a study fails, or, oh God, I'm a manager, or I don't know what my career track is immediately, or like, where's my spot bonus, or like, whatever it is, like, it's just not going to work, right? Like that is not, you can't get that type of, you get a ton of career support in terms of like learning, but you're not getting canonical career support. There probably isn't like a 10-person HR. There is not. If there is a 10-person HR department at the company, at startup, they're looking to join, you should not join that startup because they definitely have issues. We're really looking for like resilience and flexibility and willingness to roll up your sleeves and low ego. And, you'll go into the lab and pipette that thing, even though that's something that like an RA could do if you need to. And that's most important for me.
All right. Just as a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A at any point, and we'll bring those up. So Ashley, Katie, and Celine, we really heard you talk about what you're looking for in a team, what it takes to be in your shoes or in a team starting a company. If you're not familiar with this space, how do you start building your network into this space? Like, what do you think is really important for people to find their way into, to explore, to try?
I think the benefit of COVID is that a lot of things and opportunities have opened up for remote work. So just as an example, currently we have with us a fellow from the University of Montana. Her name's Keely Corder. She's great. She works in a lab that's focused on the study of highland adapted deer mice. And so she reached out to us actually, and she had a mechanism to fund a fellowship, and she was interested in getting industry experience. And we're like, great. So we helped her with that application, and we brought her on as a fellow. She's fully remote. And she's been joining our group meetings remotely and then taking one-on-ones on Zoom with different team members, or learning about what they do and what their role is at Fauna, and joining different program meetings. And when we talk about, partnership meetings, and we talk about different therapeutic programs and how we're going to advance, drugs into IND, being involved in those discussions. But then of course, through that, having a LinkedIn profile, and then, connecting to all the people you talk to on LinkedIn. And then particularly if you're looking to actively network, paying for LinkedIn Pro, it's worth it because you get these things called in-mail, and you can it's almost like cold emailing people, but on LinkedIn, and you get like an allocation of them. And, people are surprisingly warm and friendly, particularly for trainees who are looking to make connections on LinkedIn. Like, hey, I really love the work you're doing. I'd love to know more about this and how you started at this company or whatever you're doing. And, I've had people reach out to me, and people tend to want to pay it forward for people that have helped them in the past. So that is really invaluable. And it seems to be sort of a critical mass of connections you need to make on LinkedIn, so that then you can, it's almost second connect to almost anybody you need to get a hold of. But it's worth the time and effort to do that. And like I said, there's more and more opportunities to do remote work. We do take remote interns fairly frequently to work on different data projects. And so those opportunities are out there.
Great. Ashley or Celine, do you have anything to Katie or Celine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think one thing is, so if you Google around, there's a lot of there's a few good blog posts about like writing a good cold email. And that can apply to like a LinkedIn message too. But I mean, honestly, you can find people's emails, you can hack together their emails, figure out what they're interested in, listen to their podcast, and then write a damn good email. So it's like, why should I care? What are you doing? What do you need? Concrete, specific asks, like separate line, every single thing, 5 sentences, maybe 10 absolute tops. like very respectful end, which is just like, absolutely no worries if you're too busy. I completely understand, like da 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 da, right? Just like really keeping it simple and really building empathy for the person on the other side of the screen. I think often academics don't have like a model for how busy like CEOs and founders tend to be. I can't even imagine what like a Fortune 500 CEO feels like, but I like, for me personally, I have like a to-do list that I'm constantly behind on. And so like, even if I really, like I personally wish I could help like every single person out there who runs a company, like it's never going to raise above, you know, the thing I have to do for my team first. So if you want to like nail in there, it's about a high value, concise, quick ask that, you know, takes me less than 5 minutes to help you on. And then once you start building that relationship, then like if I get attached, right, then maybe I'll spend more time talking to you, right? Or maybe I'll be like willing to do a call or do a coffee, right? But you can't ask for a 1 hour coffee out the get-go, because like nobody who has like who could help you will ever agree to that.
Can you get on a 10-minute Zoom? I really want to ask you about this thing that you have particular expertise in that will help me do this particular thing. And I would really appreciate it, right? Like you can get a lot done in a 10-minute Zoom call. And then Celine, you may know 3 people who are better actually suited to help this person than you are. And you can then network them, right, to those people, right? So I think, like you said, making these really precise asks. I'm reaching out to you because of this thing that you are particularly, you know, perfectly suited for, and making sure that it's not just I'm blasting every startup founder on the West Coast, right? I reached out to you because I need this specific thing. Because if it sounds generic, it's like you haven't even read. Like we get cold inbounds all the time from, it's like that you don't even know what we do. Like you just like whatever. And I don't even bother to reply to that.
It's your communication, what you were talking about earlier, Katie, like know your audience, know what you're trying to do. What are you trying to achieve here?
Yeah, and startup founders, like, yeah, if it's only going to take 10 minutes of your time, you're like, sure, I'll help you. But they're saying, oh, can I get an hour of you to do this and this and this? You're like,
my internal team meetings are often on an hour, right? Very rarely do you need a full hour to get something done.
I think something else too is just realizing that your own personal network, there's probably a connection to the person you want to connect to. You'll be surprised. The world is small. Like we don't think about that, but we're like, oh, we really need a connection to this. And someone on our team invariably has a connection to that person. Yeah. So just also tapping into your alumni network or your own personal network and just asking, hey, do you know this person? Well, no, I don't, but you know, so-and-so does. So I'll connect you to them. And so it's hard to write a cold email, you know, look at your personal network as well.
Yeah. Kind of take a moment and really think about like all the people you've interacted with during your training. You'll be surprised how long the list gets pretty quickly. And then you can kind of branch out from there.
All right. Thank you so much. For those of you who shared questions, if we didn't get to your question, we will follow up and find some information to help you out with that. Celine, Ashley, Katie, thank you for your time today. This was really fantastic. And I appreciate the conversations and the key points that you hit on. It was a great balance of perspectives and really gave people some interesting food for thought. I am going to go ahead and share your contact information now as part of the network building. Please feel free to connect with folks on LinkedIn. As all 3 said, it's really important to be able to make those networks.